everybody. Welcome to our first event organized by the new team. I is a cook. I come from Poland. I live here since 10 years in Basel. And I see also that Sarah is here. And let's give her a big applause for doing such a good work all these years. And we are very excited to be here today with you. We can change the slide. And so our theme is spicy and was chosen by Taxon chapter, and it is illustration by Sophie McTeer, who is artist, non-binary artist and disabled artist, who is bringing people who are usually not shown in traditional art to the view. And here are our sponsors, of course, Inner Architecture and Rebecca. Our speaker today, Cold Bakery, offered us today the amazing breakfast. Hello, Sarah. So, Hanowitz and Tage is our coffee sponsor, and here is our photographer, Dirk, and our videographer is here, Marcelo Keller and his artifact. And yeah, so I would like to also ask Eva now to introduce our location.
Yeah, so I will just say very short words because you've heard it all in the newsletter, I think. But we're a verein. We have this kitchen space that is certified and I don't know how you say it, from the Lebensmittelinspektorat. English?
Very clear.
So it's for if you are looking for a location for, like, you want to cook a big dinner for people, you don't want the mess in your own kitchen, you want to have a course, or you just want to get somebody to cook for you, then come and see me after, or if you have any questions about the project or the work. And I think as part of the, I don't know if we start with the talk or I do the 30-second pitch.
No, 30-second pitch.
30-second pitch, so, because I do this on behalf of Claire, who are in the Weinlager, just behind, because they're one of our fixed tenants, so they prepare the food here. And I do it by Dutch. Yes. Also Kaffeekultur, Wein aus dem Umland, erfrischende Drinks, Negroni auf Zapfhahnen und in 10er Variationen und ein kleines, aber feines Foodangebot. Käse vom Wirthaus, Fleisch vom Basler Metzger, Brot von der Kühlbäckerei und alles dazwischen, drunter und drüber kommt von unserer eigenen Produktion von Olli, liebevoll zubereitet und zum Teilen mit Freunden. Das Claire soll das gastronomische Wohnzimmer für die Bewohnerin des neuen Quartiers und drüber hinteraus sein.
Yes. So I would like to welcome Rebecca. She is a communication coach, a speaker, and storyteller, and she will tell us how to add spice to our storytelling today.
Hey! All right. So give me fair warning if you see the door going, right? So I'm going to stand right here, but we can welcome warmly anybody who shows up. So, all right. So, as you can see, my name is Rebecca. And what I want to talk about is the art of storytelling, but from a slightly different angle. And there's something to this aspect of telling stories that many people believe that they don't have what it takes to be able to tell a good story. They think, oh, I'm so boring, or I don't have any good stories. And what I hope that by the end of this 15 or 20 minutes, that I sure as hell won't be able to tell you everything about storytelling, but that at least I've sparked your interest in your own stories and the way that you might want to play with them. So how that ties in with the spice is that the seasoning of a story is the difference between data transfer and storytelling. right? Because when it comes down to it, right, well-seasoned stories are just data with heart. It's all about how we spark connection with others, but what I also want us to be thinking about is that stories are also how we spark connection with ourselves. That before anything ever comes out of our mouths, that we're weaving these stories inside of our heads, and that affects how we then interact with the world around us. So, some of you had some gumbo. I am originally from Louisiana, and this is what originally sparked a lot of my interest. Louisiana is the land of voodoo and good food and people gathering together around big tables, all talking. And if you wanted a chance to talk, you had to make it interesting. Otherwise, people would just talk over you. And so one of the biggest things is that with the food, with the conversation, with the world around us, with the alligators and insects everywhere, roaches that fly and they're just the size of small cats and things like this, that everything was all about the seasoning. It was all about how you flavored the food. It was all about how you flavored the conversation. And when it comes to this intimate relationship between, in this case, that I'm trying to draw between food and storytelling, it's this idea that if you think about preparing the most beautiful, nutritious meal, but you don't add any seasoning, the people will still get what they want as far as the nutrition, but they will not enjoy it. And they will sure as hell not be coming back for seconds, right? And that's the difference between, again, data and storytelling. And this happens to be my favorite Louisiana seasoning. My mother does not approve. Every time she's like, that sounds abusive. And I was like, But even on the back of this seasoning, right? Even on the back of tiny seasoning containers, it still will say, the story behind this came from my mother cooking. And the point was is that every time she would cook with this seasoning, people would come and pat her on the back and say, hey, that was amazing. So the idea is the food is so good, it'll make you want to slap your mama. So with that, I mentioned story weaving. And if you think about the analogy of how many of you have ever seen somebody weaving a basket, even on television, right? You kind of know that there are all of these individual pieces that are laying around, and they pick them up and start to combine them together to create a container. And that's what happens inside of our minds when we're thinking about telling stories. And for the folks that say, oh, I don't know how to tell a story, very often it's because they think that they should just already have the basket made whenever they're ready, right? Whenever they want to tell a story, it should just be a natural thing. But in all honesty, the greatest storytellers are weaving their stories constantly. And depending on their audience, they may reweave it. And so the idea is that there's so much information around us, so many truths and perspectives, that when we think about that weaving process, it may be that for one audience or for one particular group, we will weave it into a certain form to convey something to them. But with another group, we may change that. It's not about being inauthentic, it's about bespoke, it's about tailoring conversations to the people that we're talking to. So some of you had the gumbo, and I want to use this traditional Louisiana dish as a little bit of a basis, because as I was cooking it again, I was thinking, yes, I remember, first of all, the love and the care that goes into it, because it cooks for about 6 hours, but also how it builds upon itself. And so what I want to use the gumbo for is a framework, and it's a loose framework, right? But it's just something that as you're going out, as you're having your next conversations, that maybe, something comes up where you go, what is it that I actually want to convey to the person that I'm about to speak to? And that you give just a little bit of pause and allow yourself to play with it a little bit. So the framework is this idea of foundation, frame, and fire. And it doesn't necessarily happen in this order. It can happen in any order that you want, but this is how we're going to go through it. So foundation is all about the basis. And in this, one of the things that I see a lot of times with storytelling is the temptation to embellish. The temptation to spin something in a way that, while it may not be a lie, it's not necessarily truly honest. And this is, and I say that it is truly a foundation of storytelling because real life is so much more interesting than anything that we could fabricate. We just have to be seeing it through the right lens. And so I've got a little example that I heard the other day that made me laugh when I heard a comedian talking about it. It was like something along this, I flirted with the guy from finance in the elevator on my way into the office. And then the reframe that happened, go ahead. I had a cross-functional meeting with finance this morning and we made good headway, right? Like, and it's a playful example, right? But we all know that temptation to make something feel a little bit more extravagant. But what I would say is it's all about integrity and intention. Why do you want to tell the story? And then how can you tell it with really being quite honest? And the beautiful thing is that the second piece, this frame, and no, this is not a Louisiana landscape. We are flat as can be, but it was a good illustration of what I wanted to show you. But the frame is then what allows us to find that really interesting place that we want to focus on. I mean, you see kind of this landscape, right? And you see that there's just one piece that's in focus. Again, back to that analogy of the weaving. There may be 100 pieces of reed in front of you that you want to take, but you may only take a select few. And this is how we play with understanding our perspective may change. And I'm sure you've seen it. I mean, how many have experienced when you were part of a situation and for you it was great, and afterwards you're talking to a friend and they were like, that was awful. You're like, were we in the same, right? So even different people will always have different perspectives, but we ourselves can find different perspectives of a similar story. And sometimes we have these amazing reframes. I have a couple of funny examples of this. So I heard this once from Alan Watts. He made the comment, what if we say we heard someone forcefully scraping horsehair across goat intestines? And he was like, oof, right? Another way to reframe that, back. That's all right. The violin is one of the most beloved instruments in an orchestra. It is one of these things that, that a lot of people say it is the heart of the orchestra, of a symphony. But if I don't like it, that might be how I describe it, right? It could be the most awful sound that I've ever heard, or it could be the most emotion-filled experience of my life. Okay, this is another one. Who knows this game? What's it called? All right, let's just talk about this one. It can either be a joyful children's game where you have to guess and work on your vocabulary, or it can be someplace where we slowly kill a man, depending on whether or not you can read your friend's mind, based on little tiny dashes, right? Again, they're silly examples, but just ways to be playful with it, to recognize that depending on the intention that you have, that then can set the frame. Okay, so perspective matters. And then the last is fire. And fire is all about emotion. It is all about remembering that you're not just trying to do a data transfer with someone. You are attempting to connect with someone. And through the way that you frame it and the intention that you set, it makes a big difference. But if you don't think about the emotion, you miss out. And so where I want to spend a little bit of time, is how to get fat. Gumbo is one way. But a secondary way is this acronym that saves my arse all the time. Because when I'm going into a conversation, whether that's with a friend or a colleague, or whether this is a presentation like here, I am asking myself first and foremost, what do I want them to feel? What actions would I love them to take after they leave this space? And then what thoughts do I want to inspire? For me, I wanted you to feel awake and playful this morning. I wanted you to be thinking about how maybe you haven't given yourself the chance to play with the art of storytelling quite as much as maybe you would like to. And the action is that maybe you take it and you allow yourself to experiment with maybe somebody safe, maybe in a setting that's a little bit exciting when you get the chance to think about how you might want to switch things up. So with that, thinking about this, I wanted to share a personal story from my own life. And a lot of times we have this idea that stories need to be big. One of my speaking instructors way back, he was South African, and he had all of these ridiculous stories that were incredible, like, oh, the 4 times that I got charged by white rhinos and I almost died. And it was like, fine, but I couldn't relate so much because they were very foreign to me. But there are beautiful, beautiful lessons and beautiful chances to connect in some of the smallest things. So one of the conversations that completely changed my experience, both how I communicate outwardly and inwardly, was when I was about 10 years old. I was sitting with a group of my mother's friends, and I always loved being around them because I enjoyed hearing what they were talking about. And I was asking, as I normally did, a ridiculous amount of questions because I like to understand things. I want to try and dive into things. And after one particular round of questions, one of her friends made the comment, "My goodness, you're a nosy little thing, aren't you?" And that went straight into my gut. And instantly it framed something that when I ask questions, it is viewed as nosy. And yes, I continued to ask some questions because you have to through life, but man, every time I had this little voice in the back of my head saying, "Oh, don't be too nosy." And so for years, I would ask a few questions because I couldn't help myself, and then eventually pull myself back and be like, "Oh, sorry, I know I'm asking a lot of questions." And it wasn't until a number of years ago when a very good Dutch friend of mine, who happens to be brutally honest, and I love her for it, we were having a discussion, and she was going through a super tough time, and I was asking a lot of questions. And then at some point in time, I paused and I said, "Oh, sorry, I'm being nosy." And she stopped, and she has a way of looking at me like, ugh. And she said, "You're not nosy, Rebecca. You're one of the least nosy people that I know. You're curious." Nosy wants to get information, either to just hold it or to gossip about it or just for the sake of feeling superior, whatever it might be. But curious, she said, "I feel that you genuinely care about me. You care about the people around you." And that was something that allowed me to take the turning point of becoming self-employed. Because before then, I was always just a bit hesitant, thinking, I love asking all of these questions. I love diving into people's lives with them. But it always felt invasive with the frame that I had before. And so for me, it was recognizing that the foundation and the intention was to care and love and connect with people, to help them see themselves in a fresh new way. The frame was to see that through curiosity, and the fire was just this deep love and playfulness and that emotion that I wanted to share. So, as far as spicy storytelling goes, just the next time you're starting to play, either with a conversation or with a talk that you're giving or a presentation, think about this aspect of weaving first before any words come out of your mouth to telling the stories. How would you choose to weave them intentionally, set that frame, add some spice, and have a freaking good time when you play? Thank you.
We are perfect.
We are perfect.
Yeah.
Did you hear that? We're perfect. Fantastic.
Thank you, Rebecca.
My pleasure.
Any questions?
Oh, come on, don't be shy.
We are so.
Yes.
The word weaving is weben.
Yes. I think so, yes. Double check it. Yes. Baby. Yes. Yes. Like the baskets, yes. Yes, ma'am.
I didn't think about it. Is there, like, would you say there is also the over storytelling? Because sometimes I'm wondering, like, there are all the companies, especially big companies, and they're trying to tell their stories, but it's like, oh, come on, just focus on the attention.
Absolutely. So imagine a meal that's been over-seasoned, right?
Yeah.
Like there are times when, and I've been guilty of this, I have a very dear friend who sometimes will be like, remember the adjectives, right? Like go easy on them when it's this super great, amazing time that you're going to have. And it's like, yes, I get that you're trying to play with the emotions. You're trying to express really how incredible it is. But again, a lot of times it's less is more. Like when we just feel into it, and this also comes with practice. There are times when, I mean, I don't know, I did pottery for a little while, and I can remember some of the first things that I was sculpting in that case. It's similar to weaving, but I tried to make them really extravagant, and they turned out horribly wrong, right? Because I kept thinking, yeah, more is more. But really, less is more. And with storytelling, it's about that emotion is often coming through something that we call texture, right? It's coming through sensory experiences. But we know the way that it takes to convey, like, for example, walking over here this morning, right? It was a crisp morning. I could hear the birds starting to sing because they're a bit confused, wondering where did the spring go? That was a couple of weeks ago when it was a bit warmer, right? But now imagine if I came. It was a frigid morning and I could hear every step that was being taken and the children were screaming and laughing at it. Like at some point in time, you're like, okay, I got it. I got the picture. And so that's one way to play with this, is to recognize how do I convey the most that I can with the least amount. And it's something that also goes with storytelling that's very often understood but not talked about, is that listening is one of the key aspects of storytelling. You can also see, if you're paying attention to the face of your audience, when you've lost them, right? Then maybe it's a chance to check in and, hey, say, did I lose you somewhere? Maybe they're just confused because something was a little complex. Or maybe they're like, oof, I'm stuck in the 18 adjectives that you'd use to describe the summer. Yes.
Is there an order and sequence to the foundation, frame, fire?
Nope. One thing that...
The gumbo was really good. I don't know what order you did.
So the gumbo is really interesting. Oh gosh, yeah, that's for, thank you. So the gumbo example behind that, which I totally didn't tie into because I got excited, is that it starts with a roux, which is the basis, right? I think the intention has to be first, because you have to know why it is that you want to speak in the first place. And if you don't know why, don't open your mouth. That kind of thing. It's a really tough thing, but this is it. I love to talk, right? You can tell I like to, and there are times when I find myself just talking to talk. It's okay, but if I'm looking to connect, that's not going to do it. And so I would say the foundation is truly that basis. It starts in the gumbo, it starts with this roux, this basis of just flour and oil. Very, very basic, but it's the honest base of everything. And then you can play with the frame and the fire, because sometimes if you really think about that, feel, act, think piece, then you can recognize what is the frame that would be most advantageous for this. And then there are other times where the frame is so strong that you know exactly where you want to take it from. And then you ensure that you touch on the emotion from that standpoint. Yeah. Yes. Did you have a question?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. I just remember seeing the hand come up. Oh, sorry.
I don't know if it's question, but I was wondering, it was so interesting now meeting everybody and introducing yourself to people is also kind of storytelling, which I've read about, and I've never thought about this, like, how do you tell your story?
Absolutely.
This is, I don't know if it's a question.
But it is true, right? Again, what is the frame that I want to take for myself? How am I showing up?
Yeah.
What is it that I want to focus on today, right? I mean, for example, when you walk into an event like this, right, it could be, I want to connect with as many people as possible. Maybe that's my intention. So I'm not looking to go deep. I'm looking to say like, hey, we can connect and let's go for a coffee afterwards. We can go deep later. I want to connect with a lot of people. Or let's say I want to have one interesting conversation. Then that will also change how you show up. You know, maybe you give a little bit more information when you're introducing yourself when you want to go deeper. So there are lots and lots, but it absolutely, I mean, it's the same way if you're interviewing, that's also pitching yourself, right? When you meet somebody that you might be interested to date, when you are just talking to somebody that you think, oh my gosh, we could be friends, right? All of these different things, there's so many different ways to approach it. So absolutely, how we think of ourselves, and that's the basis of story weaving. And the frame that we have for ourselves can often dictate what we believe we're capable of or what it is that we think of ourselves, right? The difference between nosy and curious. Yes.
I have a practical question about bio.
Yes.
Can we source the Sapien Mama season?
Do you know, I have found it actually on a few different places. If you have the question of it, I will just send me a little note or something like this, because I have found a guy who's sourcing it in France. He's become my new drug dealer.
What would you say to someone who tells you storytelling is when your data is not solid?
Oh. Slap. I like that. All right. Slap your speaker. Good. Okay. I would say that most of the time, that's when you have examples when somebody's trying to be overly superfluous with their words and everything like that. It's normally because they're trying to hide crappy data. Right? I will say that perspective is a big part of that. There are times when I've seen people, I mean, I had a very good friend who was a statistician, and she said, give me numbers, I can make them say anything you want me to say. Right? That's part of the integrity piece. And that's why I say it's the foundation. Because I don't believe that storytelling is just to cover data that's inadequate, but at the same time, it's exactly what happens a lot of times, right? You spin a great story. There's this movie out right now that's the woman that was doing the blood testing machine, right? And it's the whole thing was a lie, and she had billions in investment and all of this, and that was a great story, right? But I think that this is part of it, is how do we use it, again, like seasoning, that it's not necessarily always having to be this elaborate thing, because I think, how many of you have that friend that sometimes you're like, could you please just shut up? I don't want to hear another story about Uncle Ed and what happened with, whatever, these types of things. But we also know that when we deeply connect with somebody, especially in business, a lot of times it's because we were able to connect with them on an emotional, intimate level, at least something that we could play with. And that has a lot to do with how we use the stories. So I'm in full agreement, and not only, it's an and, yes. Time-wise?
Okay. Yes, we can wrap up, yes. So
fantastic.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you guys very much. And there's more gumbo if you need it.
And one more. So this is our new team. Please say hello when you have time to stay a little bit and chat with us. Thank you very much. It was lovely to have you here today, and enjoy your day.